every craft brewer should be nailing an awesome crispy boy in their brewery, despite the fact that you might not even enjoy brewing the style.
The average consumer probably grew up drinking lager. They drink it at the pub. It's everywhere. So that's what they associate beer with. So I eventually swallowed my pride and simplified it.
G'day brewers, welcome to the Quality Focus Pro Brewers podcast. My name is Hendo. I'm a pro brewer coach from the Rockstar Brewer Academy. And today I wanted to talk about a topic that's very dear to my heart, and that is lager, and why every craft brewer should be nailing an awesome crispy boy in their brewery, despite the fact that you might not even like brewing the style. So I've got a special guest on today, and I wanted to get someone who, in the realm of lager, that I admire and respect, and I couldn't think of anyone better than the person who actually taught me how to brew lager originally. So I'd like to introduce you, Matthew Cuthbert. He's the head brewer of Rebel Brewing Company here in Brisbane, Australia. How you going, Matty?
Good, mate. That makes me sound pretty old, teaching you how to brew something all those years ago.
You remember when we first met?
I don't remember the exact meeting, no.
No, it was the old Southern Bay days back in 2012, I think it was. And At that time, you had already been working at Southern Bay for, I think, 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, Jesus.
That brewery was absolutely wild, because just for those listening, just to give you an idea as to what this brewery was like, the brew house was mild steel, so it wasn't shiny stainless, it was mild steel. And then there were no cylindrical tanks in this brewery. It was all like old school square tanks, and a very, very old bottling line as well. Do you remember those days, mate?
Blocked a lot of that coming out, to be honest. It was like a different life. Modern day brewers really don't have anything to complain about, for anyone that actually ever saw or worked at Southern Bay.
Tell us a little bit about your brewing history, pre and post Southern Bay, mate.
I spent 7 odd years down in Geelong at Southern Bay, out of Ballarat Uni. One of the first 2 ever to graduate from that brewing course in Ballarat. So it does make me feel a bit old. And then remember Odyssey Tavern down in Geelong. I think about 12 months working there. And then the opportunity came up at Rock's Brewery in Sydney. At the time, they just put in a Hebs brewery, or high efficiency brewing system, which was a mash press.
Yep.
Yeah, so I'd never seen one of those. I went up there and met Scotty and the crew, and I was pretty impressed by it all.
How long were you at Locks for?
4 years, roughly 4 years.
Yeah, right.
And then Emma and I were both we're a little bit fed up with the city life in Sydney, I guess. We had a good time, but living in Marrickville in the sort of hubbub of Sydney, we discussed what we wanted to do. And the option was to either move to Queensland, where we both had family, or go back to Victoria. So we decided to have a crack at coming up to Queensland.
So now you find yourself at Rebel Brewing Co. And originally that was a brew pub over in Bulimba. And then they expanded to where you're sitting now. You've got quite a few trophies from Royal Queensland, Australian International Beer Awards. I remember, and to our point today, talking about lager, was the trophy that you won for the New Zealand Pilsner. Was that last year?
No, that was 2022, I believe.
2022, yes, that's right.
Up until that point, we'd never won a lager gold medal. So we'd won some for various ales and stouts and other sours, but getting the lager right was the hardest thing to do. Anyway,
let's talk about lager today. So basically, in this day and age, I think it's important that a brewery has what I call a killer flagship lager. Like here we are in 2024, the industry's gone through either a flat or a slight decline period. And the thing is that craft beer as a proportion of the total beer market has not grown in a decade. And so the only way that craft breweries are going to grow is if they grow into the consumers who don't normally drink craft beer. And there's a hell of a lot of people who go, I don't drink that fruity stuff. And they're gravitating towards lager, and in particular craft lager. Why do you think it's so important that a brewery has just a rock solid lager in its year-round range?
Oh, I think there's a couple of reasons. Yeah, as you say, the average consumer probably grew up drinking lager. They drink it at the pub. It's everywhere. So that's what they associate beer with. I guess the other 8% may have had more experience and they've been to America or Europe or something and drank different beers. Or even, obviously, craft breweries are a lot more widespread now. They might have a local brewer, they get to try a couple of different beers and that sort of stuff. It opens their mind up a little bit. So I guess from a craft brewer's point of view, you want to capture those people that are coming to your brewery for the first time or whatever, and they get probably overwhelmed when they walk in. There's 12, 18 different taps of all these weird and wonderful beers. It may be a bit overwhelming as a consumer. You don't really know. So a lager is probably safe in a way. It's something they're familiar with. And it's also a volume beer. Generally, when people have a session, they have 2, 3, 5 beers. They tend to drink something that's a bit easier drinking, like a lager. Like our one, which I've conveniently got, is 4.2% on the lower ABV.
Yes.
Aimed at sort of people drinking or being able to drink a bit more, or people being health conscious and everything now and not drinking as much as well. Than a 5% lager, so you can actually probably have a whole nother beer and get the same amount of standard drink.
Exactly.
I think there's a range of factors that's what people are familiar with. So when they go to a brewery, they'll order a pint of lager or whatever it is. So as a craft brewer, it's good. You need to be able to have that option. And obviously you want to have a good one so that people will drink it and then drink it again. That's what you're going for.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Some crack this open. I was sitting there, mate. It's a bit hot today in the brewery. Lunchtime, isn't it?
You're far away, mate. That's totally cool, mate. Yep, it's summer. It's beer o'clock, mate. It's interesting because like you see a lot of people who are going down the road of perhaps starting a brewery, thinking that they don't want to have a lager in their lineup, right? And reminds me, I was speaking to one of the Rockstar Brewer Academy community members, Brenton Shoemaker from Kickback Brewing down in Adelaide. Have you met Brenton? You probably met him.
I don't think so.
Down in
Yeah.
You might have. Oh, you probably wouldn't have met him when we were judging down in Adelaide a couple of years ago. But he basically, we ran a brewer skill session a couple of months ago, and it's called, funnily enough, it's called Formulated Killer Flagship Lager, and it basically runs through the whole how to make a lager that's accessible and that sort of thing. And before that I recorded that session, he basically sent me a message. Right, let me read the message to you. What he said. He basically said, every craft brewery needs to be nailing a lager. Our lager is our biggest volume seller week after week after week. It's not that it's our best beer or anything. It's just that as a brew pub with a very customer-inclusive environment, we get significant numbers of what I guess you would call non-craft beer drinkers. They just go straight for the lager and keep coming back for more. But they're not scared of it, and ultimately they move on to something else after realizing craft beer isn't that bad after all. So although brewing a lager isn't super exciting, it is super challenging and rewarding when you get it right. And even better, is a huge contributor to paying the bills. He's pretty well there, isn't he?
What I was touching on before. You get a lot of non-craft people or people that just come to your venue for a beer, or with our 2 venues, they might come actually for dinner or a feed. So just accompanies whatever they're eating. So yeah,
exactly.
I was just to say, it's interesting. When we started Revel, the lager was one of the first beers we made, almost from my point of view, reluctantly. In fact, we're starting a new brewery. I don't want to make lager.
Why is that?
I've made it for, I guess as a craft brewer, you want to keep exploring and making different things. But obviously, you know that you need a lager. And I remember one time, it wasn't that far into the journey, I actually tried to get rid of it, but they wouldn't let me for obvious reasons. And now
it pays the bills, mate. Pays.
To this day, our biggest volume beer. Like there's a tank of lager sitting here right behind me.
Yes.
In dry volume, it's by far the biggest in both wholesale and also at the tap rooms. So it's, it really is the thing that you need to do and do well.
So tell us about your process of creating your lager, right? Because there's a big temptation for brewers to get creative, right? And you've hit the nail on the head yourself when you said, I wanted to do something creative. And so brewers turn towards things like dry hopping a lager or adding tropical flavors or trying to turn them around faster by using quake yeast and all that sort of thing. Why is your lager so simple? What makes it simple?
Well, interesting you say that, because I actually was doing those things. I used to dry hop it. It started off as a New World lager, so it had some Kiwi hops in it. And the feedback was it's too fruity for people. They just want something clean and simple.
Yes.
So I thought
if they want something fruity, they can go and drink the pale ale or the IPA or something.
Yeah, exactly. So I eventually swallowed my pride and simplified it. And talking of awards, actually, not blowing my own trumpet, but the AIBA has just gone and actually gold medaled for the first time as an Australasian lager. So we sort of went from the realm of a dry hopped New World, lying it right back, quite simplifying it. And now it's actually, gold medaled as a Australasian lager. And now people love it.
And did you see the sales and production of it increase as a result of that simplification?
Huey, who does their sales for us, was just saying yesterday, at the moment, the Kings are absolutely flying out the door this time of year.
Beautiful.
So, yeah.
Beautiful. That's amazing. So tell us about some of the challenges around brewing that simplified lager, because now that you're not dry hopping it or calling it a New World lager or anything like that, and it's becoming a much simpler sort of recipe, it implies that, and because lager is such a clean style, it's Pilsner malt, very little hopping to it, usually very seldom has late additions, that sort of thing. And if even then they're very minimal, it basically means that you've got nowhere to hide your mistakes because it's such a clean style. What are some of the common faults that you generally find when you're trying to brew that clean and crisp lager?
I think with that in mind, everything you just said, it really highlights your process and making sure that your process is bang on, because if it's not, things will show up. So it obviously starts with, the recipe is quite simple. Ours, I think, is 95% pale or Pilsner malt. And it's just got a little bit of yeast in it. It helps with a bit of the protein or head retention. And that's it. So there's no sort of malt flavor in it, really. So it's important from the start to get your water chemistry right in the mash.
Yes.
Originally, we had it quite soft, but I think because of the lack of calcium in the beer, it was actually affecting the yeast and the attenuation and both the flocculation of the yeast. We don't actually filter any of our beers, so we're relying on the yeast to flock out to get bright, whereas a lot of breweries will centrifuge or filter. So getting that right was important, getting the balance of salts right and minerals. And then even through the brewing process, keeping the pH down is pretty important. Acidify as well, because then
because if you don't have you're acidifying your runoff and that sort of thing is one thing. It's going to stop you getting chill haze, all that sort of stuff. But also pH is super important for the beer flavor as well, because if your pH of the finished beer is too high, then that lager is going to taste flabby, right, and dull. Whereas you need that acidity.
Yeah, absolutely. Flabby as a descriptor. I got told in beer judging not to use that at the Indies recently. But I think it's a good word.
Really?
Flabby, it's sort of...
What would you call it?
Not as drinkable.
Some people call it mousy when the pH is too high.
Yeah, I think mousy is a bit different. But yeah, I know what you mean. It's almost soapy when the pH is high.
Exactly. But that little bit of acidity in there is essentially what makes a crispy boy crisp. It's like that crispness is acidity. And so if you've got a finished beer pH of yours too high, then it's not going to taste as good as what it should.
But you think of anything that's full of sugar, it's quite acidic to balance out all the sugar so you can actually eat it. Wine, or red wine in particular, I think pH is like 3.2 for the same reason. The acidity actually makes it drinkable.
Yes.
So it's really, the acidity is the balance and actually makes it more drinkable or eatable with food. So yeah, that's super important. So wort pH, we try and get the final wort down to about 5 before we run into the fermenter. And then final beer pH, you want it under 4.2 as an absolute sort of high point for that drinkability.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And you're not using like RO water or anything funny like that.
No, we're not. We do filter the water, but it's
but it's largely, it doesn't have anything done with the alkalinity of it. So for those who, Brisbane water has very high alkalinity, and it's not really designed for brewing lager like you would if you think about Pilsen water as a historical beer style and that sort of thing. So it is challenging to make a lager here in Brisbane because of our water supply.
The water pH for all those brewers out there, it's just been bumped up. We're actually noticing it now in the brewery, having to put a lot more acid in to get it down.
Yeah, we are in 100%. We're in this municipal water network that goes all the way. It lasts, it's about 200 or 300 miles, about 200 or 300 kilometers, and that sort of thing. Goes all the way from Noosa all the way to the border, and there's lots of dams and reservoirs and an RO plant, desalination plant, and they're just swinging valves all the time. So we've got a lot of challenges with our water. Let's talk about the hops in your lager now. What do you? I think in this style, less is more, and I think when if you think about your regular macro lager, like the IBU count on those sorts of beers can be as low as 8, and typically that's pretty much where you 8 to 12 IBU. And then when you see, novice brewers or home brewers who go and brew something that they think is just like Carlton Draft and they're throwing 30 IBU in it, it's a little bit over the top. And when you tell someone that, yes, well, Great Northern or Bud Light or something like that's really only 8 to 12 IBUs, it's like it comes as a bit of a shock that there's so little hops in the beer. What are you usually targeting with your lager?
As a kettle edition, we're probably playing maybe 10 IBU, 8 to 10, as a bittering hop. We do actually still put in, it's not very much. It's probably a gram and a half a litre into the Whirlpool with hops.
Yep.
Usually
a little bit of character, nothing wrong with that.
Just a little bit. If you were judging it, you might just get a whiff. Just enough to have some sort of interest in it.
Just a whiff?
Just a whiff, that's all you need. So we probably pick up, not much, because we chill our Whirlpool to 80 degrees before we actually put any hops in.
So this beer is probably sitting somewhere to 12 to 14.
We probably, by the time it's fermented out, it's about 15, and then we're putting now 4 to 5 IBU of Tetra hop into it.
Oh, okay. What's the reason for that?
There's a couple of reasons. Head retention is a big one. Foam stability, and just to get that extra sort of IBU boost. So it sits at around 18 to 20 as a finished beer. So it's
so little bit of a bittering addition, 8 to 10 IBU, 2 or 3 or 4 IBU from a Whirlpool edition, and 5 IBU a Tetra, and that's about it.
Yeah. So it's pretty light on, pretty simple. Whereas it used to be dry hopped and So sort of dial more aggressive and all that sort of thing. Yeah, indeed, definitely.
Indeed. All right, hops, very simple. Now, lagers are yeast beers, because if the water doesn't really taste like anything, the malt base is really simple, and the hopping that you've described is very, very simple. Yeast really comes into play here, and it can really make or break a lager. What sort of character should, what sort of a yeast character do you aim for? And tell us a little bit about your yeast and fermentation for your flagship lager.
This is an interesting one as well. I've tried multiple different strains, and like the lager itself, you circle back to the classics. Originally, we were getting White Labs liquid yeast in and growing it up. So I tried the German lager strain, probably 2 or 3 other ones. And then I've tried dried yeast from probably 4 or 5 of the main suppliers or manufacturers.
Yep, all the usual suspects, your Weihenstephan strain and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, so the one we're using now is actually the Weihenstephan, not the one everyone uses. It's from a different supplier, but it's essentially that.
Yes.
And this was a bit of an eye-opener a few years ago. I think you're there with me when Fermentus did whatever they do, their little presentation over at Newstead.
Oh, the Academy thing,
Academy.
Yes.
And they said that you can run their lager yeast up to 19 degrees and it still comes out clean.
That is right.
So it actually took me a little while to get my head around fermenting lagers that warm. But in recent times, we run them at 17, 18 degrees, and they're actually coming out really clean.
Yeah, so I do the same.
By running them like that, they're almost fermenting like an ale, essentially. You're getting fermentations done in 4 or 5 days. Blows off all the sulfur. I guess lagers are sort of well known to often having sulfur, and that's generally because they ferment a lot slower, because of nut activity during the fermentation holds onto a lot of sulfur, which then either needs to be stripped out or conditioned out. With such a vigorous ferment, there's not a lot of sulfur left at all. So that, for me, that's definitely sort of a positive. And then
that's a real eye-opener.
Yeah, well, it changed my thinking around how you actually make them. Bit of Australian lager should always have a bit of banana rama going on. bit of isoamyl.
Little bit of isoamyl acetate, yes.
But the vine for Stone Australian doesn't throw that much, I don't think. Even at 18, 19 degrees.
No,
It's
pretty clean.
quite clean.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
it's really interesting when I've spoken to some homebrewers who've, say, built a brewery and that sort of thing, and they go, yeah, I'm going to have a lager. And then they say, oh, I'm fermenting this at, I've had some brewers who've joined the Rockstar Brewer Academy going, yeah, I'm fermenting 3470, the Vine Stefan strain, at 8 degrees Celsius. I'm like, why are you doing that? What's the point?
Yeah.
What are you trying to achieve? It certainly shouldn't be about being traditional or anything like that, because if this is going to be your biggest selling beer, you definitely want to be smashing it through as quickly as possible. And
that's another thing.
You and I are in the same boat, right? And we'll talk a little bit about the residence time in a second, right? I was in the same boat. I used to ferment 3470 at like 12 degrees Celsius. I don't know what it is in freedom units off the top of my head. So it sounds like 50s or something like that, maybe low 60s or something.
In Fahrenheit.
And in Fahrenheit. So I was at the same fermenter session that you were at, and they said 15 to 17. I'm like, come on. And then I tried it, and I tried it at 15, and all of a sudden it was a cleaner ferment. It was faster.
Yeah.
It cleaned up the diacetyl faster. The yeast were happier and healthier. It dropped out quicker. No sulfur, as you said. It's just a game changer, I think, is that not thinking for a second that you need, just because you're brewing a lager, that you need to go cold fermentation to get a decent flavor outcome in your beer. Do you know what I mean?
And it is a bit of you have to change your sort of way you're looking at it, change your perception of what lager is. But once you get your head around it, it's definitely, I would recommend doing it. It's definitely beneficial to the beer itself and the yeast health and all those sort of things. And definitely turns the beer over quicker, which if you're making fun of your lager, that's what you want.
Yeah. What's your typical residence time for your lager?
Probably 4 weeks.
Go on.
The Southern Bay, we, because of the cooling there, didn't really have proper fermentation control. So those lagers would often get up to 19, 20. And they would rip through. I remember fermenting lagers in like 3 days. They'd actually be quite clean. But which I think was one of the original, when I started there, was like the CEB. Yeah. So it's gone full circle, making very simple, fast fermenting lager again.
Yes.
And it's actually, that's what the big guys do.
4 weeks is pretty decent. Yeah, exactly. 4 weeks is a pretty quick turnaround, mate. Here's another misconception about lager is that like it's going to take 2 or 3 months. It's got to sit there and chill. But if this is going to be, this is the thing though, that you got to take into consideration. If your lager is going to be your biggest seller, you got to turn it around as quickly as you can and balance that outcome, the flavor outcome that you want from the beer with the economics of running a brewery and paying the bills and keeping the lights on and that sort of thing.
I think
is pretty
for
decent.
us, that's mainly, it's a clarification thing. If we could get it brighter quicker, we would process it quicker. If we had it fused or filtration. I don't think the flavor really benefits from having an extra month sitting there cold, to be honest. Once the yeast is out of the beer,
why do you think?
Why doesn't that improve?
Yeah, what's your manner of thinking? Well, I think of why traditionally with beer sitting there on chill for weeks and weeks and weeks doesn't do it?
I think that was more the traditional way of actually making lager. Yeah. Well, the fermentation's a lot slower. There probably is more sulfur and more sort of stuff you're trying to condition out of the beer. Whereas if you're fermenting it quicker and basically you're almost treating it like an ale, all that stuff happens a lot metabolically, a lot faster. So basically once it's clean, it's clean. It's not going to benefit anymore once you've got the yeast and everything out of it. So it's basically once it's ready, it's ready.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's some of the common faults that you generally see in your typical crispy boy pale lager? And what's some of the tips that you might have on making sure that, because pretty much all of the flavors you're going to have in a lager are going to be yeast and fermentation related. So what will be your top 3 faults to watch out for, and give us your tips on how to minimize those things?
Definitely, but there's probably one other big one we've jumped over that is very common in lagers, DMS.
Yes,
I guess it's acceptable to some degree, but that is pretty common because they're mostly brewed with pale malt, which has more of the DMS precursor in it. So for us, we boil for 70 minutes. We were having a little bit of DMS come through. So bumping the boil time up 10 minutes has actually made a big difference. So you sort of want that stripped out, which people, I guess, know what that is. That's your sweet corn, tomato sauce type flavor you pick up.
Yep. Cooked vegetable, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So it just makes the beer, doesn't taste as clean. It's a little bit dirty, the actual flavor of it.
So increasing your boil time. Yep.
Yeah. That's really what it is. It's just that I don't think the vigorousness, is that the vigor of your boil, actually makes much of a difference. We have an internal calandria here and it boils quite hard, but it's really just a time thing, we found out. So whether you got a electric kettle, gas fired, steam, whatever it is, it's time to actually boil it off.
I learned recently it's a pH thing, wort pH thing too during the boil.
Yeah, we contribute.
Have you noticed that? So if you get your wort pH during the boil at around 5.4 and above, obviously you don't want to have it too high, but you don't want to have it too low either. That is the sweet spot for driving off DMS a bit quicker. I think.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, right.
We haven't actually explored that.
No, we're not.
Have a look at it, mate.
Yeah,
have a look at it.
Actually. Back to your question about fermentation, a couple of big ones stand out. Diacetyl.
That's butterscotch.
If you're fermenting the beer cooler, often it won't generate enough heat in the fermentation towards the end to get the 3-4 degrees above the fermenting temperature for the diacetyl or VDK rest. So brewers will chill them too early, or the yeast won't be healthy enough to actually reabsorb the diet precursor. So the last thing you want in a crispy boy is traces of diacetyl.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, you want it nice and clean, and obviously every fermentation makes it, but healthy yeast and being at that higher temperature will actually clear up the diet a lot quicker.
What else is a common problem during fermentation?
Sulfur. Yep. So again, I think this is
we're talking H2S here, yeah.
Yeah, H2S is a big one. If you've got a really unhealthy fermentation, you can probably pick up some phenolic flavors, like yeast stress, which once that's in your beer, you can't get it out.
Yep.
So if anyone's ever had stuck ferments or just underpitch yeast or unhealthy yeast, phenolic or chlorophenolic flavors might pop up.
I found that happening with like 3470 or Weihenstephan yeast ferments that have gotten just above the top of their upper temperature limit, and that's when the phenolic starts to happen. You might be running a little hot. Yep. What else?
Well, if it's running hot, you might pick up higher alcohols and other in spirits. They're called congeners, which are desirable, but not in beer, not in lager.
No, exactly.
Another thing as well, we were talking before about beer being flabby. If you ferment it quicker, generally the pH will drop quicker. So you're getting that sort of crispy boy you're after. So that's another thing to be mindful of.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeast remaining in your beer. If it's an unhealthy yeast and your beer is hazy, whether it's yeast and or protein in your beer, I think that's something you want to avoid. So again, that's a yeast health and temperature thing. What have we talked about? Diac, sulfur.
Yep. Acetaldehyde might come into play as well if you underpitch.
Oh, yeah. Acetaldehyde's incomplete fermentations. That's a bit of a homebrew special, the old acetaldehyde. Yeah, which is actually toxic. That's what your body actually makes booze back into acetaldehyde when your liver processes it. That's what makes you sick.
That's what gives you a hangover.
Yeah. Green apple. So that's often if you haven't oxygenated your wort, if you are repitching or underpitched, or again, yeast health. Yeah. So all those sort of things largely related, I think, to the health of your yeast and also the temperature you're running it at.
Obviously you still consider yourself to be quite a creative brewer and that sort of thing. And we've brewed a couple of beers together over the years in your time at Revel and elsewhere. But talking about, your flagship lager and that sort of thing, what's the most rewarding part about getting that style right?
I think because it's so simple, it also makes it quite challenging to brew for all the things we've just discussed. All those sort of faults in lower amounts, there's nowhere to hide. You're not dry hopping the beer. There's not malt flavor in the beer. There's not yeast flavor in the beer. So they really stand out. So you're just going for something, essentially, the cleaner, the better, really. And it all harks back to your process, both through the brew house and then how you're fermenting your beer. So if you after all you're carbonating it, and I've nailed this, it is quite rewarding because it's so challenging to do and do well.
That's awesome. If you are interested in learning a little bit more about how to brew a killer flagship lager, maybe you should have a chat to us about the Rockstar Brewer Academy. I will leave a link in the description below, and you can book in what's called a calibration call. Matty won't be there though. He'll be in his brewery just making some awesome lager and that sort of thing. But if that's a challenge you currently face in your brewery, reach out, have a chat. Let's see if there's something we can do to help remedy that situation. And if you want to come and join the conversation, come and join the Facebook group. If you head to qualityfocusprobrewers.com, there's a link on the page there and you can join the Facebook group, and we'll get Matty in there as well, and he can have a chat to you and that sort of thing about how to make an ace lager. And maybe one day, Matty, you will win that Wyman jumpsuit for a lager.
I haven't given up.
It's the pinnacle. Yeah. You've been in this game for a long time, and this is one of those life challenges, which is a multi-decade challenge. And I certainly hope you get there in the future. And
maybe I'll have to go over to Germany and work there for a while or something, and just get one for working.
go and do VLB for 6 months or something like that. And you'll nail it. Awesome. Matty Cuthbert from River Brewing Co. Thank you so much for joining us today. That was a really informative chat. I really, really enjoyed it. And as I said, come and join us, qualityfocusprobrewers.com. Thanks very much for joining us in this episode, and we'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.
Cheers, guys.